All right, so this is plant form and function, which is chapter 34 in your textbook. Okay, so we're still working on plants. So here are the objectives for this chapter. Okay, so we're looking at different parts of the plant, but like the roots, the stem, and the leaves. Okay. Okay, so plants carry out photosynthesis. They use the energy from the sunlight and the simplest of starting materials, so like carbon dioxide, water, okay, and other nutrients like potassium, nitrogen, and magnesium. And then they synthesize different compounds, so compounds like carbohydrates or lipids or um, proteins. So the structure of a plant's body is dynamic, and most of the plants grow throughout their lives, and they exhibit what is known as intermediate growth. Okay. So they grow when they have the required nutrients and resources, but then when they don't, they kind of take a pause. So we're going to look at the three fundamental questions, and we're going to just focus on angiosperms. So we're going to see how the plant body is organized, why are plants so diverse, and how do plants grow throughout their lives. So for photosynthesis to occur, plants need a lot of light, CO2, and water. For the synthesis of carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids, they also need things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and magnesium, as well as other nutrients. And these normally exist in nature, and they're found as ions that are dissolved in water. Okay, so plants use two basic systems to acquire resources for photosynthesis. They have the above ground system, which is the shoot system. Okay, that's the one that will harvest the light and will also take in carbon dioxide uh, from the atmosphere to produce the carbohydrates. And then there's the below ground system, which is the root system. And this functions to anchor the plant so that it doesn't get, blown over or knocked down. And it also takes in water and nutrients from the soil. So together, these systems make the plant body. The root and the shoot systems, um, they both function in absorption. So the root system absorbs water and the key nutrients like the nitrogen and potassium and magnesium. And the shoot system absorbs sunlight or light. Okay? And because the absorption takes place across a surface, and because the cells that used absorb light and molecules occupy volume, the plant is efficient in absorption if it has a large surface area to volume ratio. Okay. So here, if we look at these three examples, all three of these have the same volume. Okay, the volume is given here, but they have different surface areas. So because the surface area to volume ratio is just the surface area over the volume, so just dividing the surface area by the volume, the the one with the largest surface area will have the higher surface area to volume ratio. So when you look at something thick and robust like a potato, okay, which is part of the root, okay, and then you divide its surface area by the volume, you'll get a surface area to volume ratio of 0.03. For something like a tube-like structure like roots, when you divide the surface area by the volume, you'll get a surface area to volume ratio of 0.04. Okay, so this is a higher surface area. And then when you look at something like leaves, which are really flat, and you divide the surface area by the volume, you'll get something around 0.05. So out of all three, the leaves have the higher surface area to volume ratio. And the surface area to volume ratio is important because it affects the physiology of organisms. Okay. So for leaves, they need that high surface area to volume ratio in order to absorb the sunlight and also to metabolize energy. Okay. The root system um, is made up of different parts. So there's the taproot, which is going to be the main vertical root, usually like the longest. And then there's lateral roots that uh, kind of shoot out horizontally. But the main function of the root overall, of the roots overall, is to anchor the plant, to absorb water and nutrients from the soil, and also to conduct that water into the shoot system. So the water has to go from the roots and then up into the shoots. In vascular plants, that's carried out by vascular tissues like the xylem. The roots also obtain the energy that's produced in the shoot system. So when the leaves are taking in sunlight and also the carbon dioxide, and they're uh, conducting photosynthesis and respiration, the energy that's made in the shoot system will find its way down into the roots. Okay? And that's also carried out by the vascular tissues like the phloem. So the roots are also able to store material that's produced in the shoot system for later use. So some studies have shown that roots of trees routinely extend beyond the above ground canopy. So when you look at a tree, you can just picture that beyond the canopy of the tree, if you actually looked underground, you would see a very extensive root system. So it's not unusual for a plant's root system to be over 80% of the total biomass. Okay, so we have the root system. So although most root systems contain the same general structures, the root systems are diverse. So we have morphological diversity. So these are just differences among the species. There's phenotypic plasticity, which is these are changes that the root can have in response to changes in the environment. Okay. And then there's modified roots. So these are roots that have unusual functions. So if we look at the prairie plants, so these are prairies are grassland ecosystems that have many herbaceous plants. So these are plants that lack woody tissue. So the root systems of prairie grasses are considered to be perennial because they live for many years. So this is different than something that's an annual. Annual plants they'll grow within the year and then they'll die at the end of at the end of their growing season. And then they'll come back the following year. Perennial plants will live for many years. So prairie grasses can show diversity among species. So this is important because it allows for different species to occupy the same area with uh, with less competition. Okay. So here you can see different types of herbaceous plants, and you can see the different types of roots would allow these plants to live adjacent to each other, right? Because they're using different resources. So here we have a non-native, grass or long grass or lawn grass for comparison. So these roots would be very shallow roots. Okay? When you look at these native grasses, there's different lengths even among them. Okay? So they're tapping into different parts of the soil, so they're taking in nutrients from different parts of the soil, and so that reduces the competition among them. So the morphological diversity in roots also occurs within and among species. Roots are able to show phenotypic plasticity, okay, which again is a change that is in response to changes in the environment. Okay? And for example, if you look at something like a spruce tree, these tend to have root systems that are less than a meter deep if they're grown in wet soil that's low in oxygen or that lacks oxygen. So that means that the roots have to be shallow because otherwise they would suffocate. But if you grow that same tree in a drier soil, then they would have a deeper root system. Okay. So you can see that genetically identical individuals will have very different root systems in different environments. So phenotypic plasticity is important because plants grow throughout their lives and they have to be able to change in response to the changes in the environment. Okay. You can also see that roots will stop growing or even die back a little in areas that are lacking resources. So if it's lacking resources, the plant's not going to invest that much energy into the root system. When you look at modified roots, these are um, roots that are formed by various types of plants. So the first example is our adventitious roots. These are roots that grow from the shoot system. Yeah. And you can see this in things like ivy, which use it to anchor, it uses it to anchor the plant to either another plant or some other type of surface. You can also see prop roots, which help brace the plant. And then you can see pneumatophores, which are specialized lateral roots in the genus Abyssinia, and these function in gas exchange. So they take in oxygen um, and it diffuses into the root system through these pneumatophores. Other types of modified roots that you can see are in biennial plants like carrots and beets. So these have storage roots where they store a lot of the carbohydrates during the plant's first two growing seasons. Okay, so this is pretty much at this is when the plants would be harvested. So when you're eating carrots or things like beets, you're eating the stored carbohydrates in the roots of the plant. So if the roots weren't harvested, then the plants would just keep growing and they would go to seed and then produce large flowering shoots. So here you can see some examples of the different types of roots. So the anchor roots, you can see here, which anchor the stems to walls or other plants. You have the prop roots, okay, that help stabilize the plant. These are the pneumatophores that function in gas exchange between the roots and the atmosphere. And then here are the sugar beets, which mainly store carbohydrates. All right, so in the next video, we'll move on to the shoot system.